Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Politics Meet the Candidates, presented by the Dallas Examiner. The Dallas Examiner has presented Monday Night Politics Meet the Candidates for over 12 consecutive years before major elections. Monday Night Politics Meet the Candidates is a series of forums, not debates, but forums designed to inform the community of the qualifications, experiences, and platforms of candidates for elected office. Our sponsors are nonprofit organizations. You can view the forums on www.dallasexaminer.com and Facebook Live. Also, you can view it on the Dallas Examiner app. Tonight, and well, rather for this series of forums, our moderator is Charles O'Neill. Charles is president of the Texas Association of African American Chambers of Commerce. He was the first editor of the Dallas Examiner and was here when my father started the paper in 37 years ago. Again, I want to thank you for attending Monday Night Politics and thank you for your support.
Good evening and welcome to this October 10th edition of Monday Night Politics, brought to you by the Dallas Examiner newspaper. Tonight we have a candidate for governor, the Democratic candidate for governor, Mr. Beto O'Rourke. Many of you have heard of him. You've watched his campaign. We're fortunate to have you here with us this evening to further expand on your campaign, how it's going, and specifically on the impact on our primary readers, our primary viewing audience for this purpose, Dallas's black community. I don't think it would be derelict of me if I did not note that we are here in the office of the late great attorney Fred Finch, who is the founder, my friend, my mentor, the founder of the Dallas Examiner newspaper. Right on that table, we put the finishing touches on the dream that became the Dallas Examiner newspaper back in 1985, first issue published in 1986. And so I am honored to be here, and this is hallowed territory for me as well. So welcome this evening. So we're going to table, if you will, the tried and true campaign fodder, right? Healthcare, education, criminal justice, and that kind of thing. Black viewers, black Texans have withstood, particularly in the last legislative session, withstood a literal assault on civil liberties. Just voting, just gerrymandering, just banning books and changing and fights against critical race theory and all that. Let's say tomorrow you're elected, right? How will you govern with a legislature that's the font of that kind of legislation? You know, these folks actually said that Harris County should have one voting drop-off location. 7 million people. That's crazy. Oh, wow, for 5 million people. That's crazy, you know, but that was fine with them. Texas would qualify for 2 more congressional seats. We can attribute that growth to ethnic minority population growth. No increase in ethnic minority representation in Congress. The last redistricting resulted in dramatic changes in the makeup of House legislative districts. How would you govern with that kind of, I'll say, opposition?
It's interesting that you mentioned within that litany of attacks on members of our communities and our fellow citizens in Texas, this critical race theory issue that the governor's raised in the last year or so. As we know, critical race theory, when taught, is taught in graduate level courses, not something you find in the first or second grade in any elementary school in the state of Texas, and yet a useful distraction or deflection for the governor, and also a chance to try to scare people about other people and about stories and about history. But I find it interesting because when I look to our history and these attacks on the right to vote that you describe and civil liberties and civil rights are, of course, not new to Texas. And we've really been the ground zero for some of the greatest challenges, especially on African American voters. I think about 99 years ago in 1923, the white primary law was passed and signed by the then governor that forbade any African American from voting in any election of consequence in the state of Texas. But if that was the case, and it was, so was the fact that those who were able to overcome that law also came from Texas. You had folks like Dr. Lawrence Nixon in El Paso who challenged that law, won 2 successful Supreme Court victories. Lonnie Smith from the 5th Ward in Houston, a black dentist who in the Smith versus Allwright decision in 1944 really brought those victories home. And I believe, in my reading of history, set the stage for Lyndon Baines Johnson, the first Texas president, to sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law. And all that is meaningful to me because that VRA has never been under greater attack than it is now, and nowhere more so than it is in the state of Texas. But for us to hold our breath and expect that someone else, whether it's the Supreme Court or the president or unfortunately even Congress, although I will tell you Congressman Mark Vesey and Congressman Allred are 2 of the greatest champions of voting rights. They've been unable to prevail upon an intransigent Senate to do their part in this. The answer is going to come from Texas, and it's going to come through winning this election on November 8th, freeing teachers to teach the full story and history of Texas, and then get past the deflection and the distractions and get on with the big, important things, whether it's fully funding public ed, expanding Medicaid, focusing on the kinds of jobs that we want, equal treatment under the law for everybody in the state of Texas, rolling back this attack on women through an abortion ban that begins at conception with no exception for rape or incest. There are so many good things that we can and will do, but getting past this effort to disenfranchise literally millions of our fellow Texans is going to be key to that. And I mention our history only to remind us that not only can we overcome this current challenge, we have overcome it before against even greater odds and prevailed.
I appreciate that, but I'm just thinking, wow, how is it possible that there were greater odds when clearly there were, because it was really a trenchant kind of thing going on at the time. But how is it possible that today, given you just said we can overcome it, but I'm looking at the political landscape, and there are literally millions of Texans who hew to this other perspective. Given, again, we know that it's wrong. We know that it's, in my case, I would say immoral, that folk would say that Charles O'Neill should not have a right to vote or elect the person of his choice. So how do you change the minds of people besides being on the campaign trail?
I guess I begin with the acknowledgement that there are some minds I will not be able to change. And I must respect the conclusions that these people have come to and the votes that they will cast. But there are others who I really do think will require us showing up in person. And, it means that 2 things from my perspective. One, that we not write anybody off. No county's too rural, no voter too Republican to mean that we don't show up and listen to them and learn from them and try to find some common ground. But by that same token, I think some Democrats will make the mistake of taking other voters for granted. And I think specifically black and brown voters. And to say, you or your mother or father have voted for me or Democrats in the past, so I can count on you voting for me again this time. I won't bother to show up and listen to you and learn from you and work with you. And I'll go chase this mythical swing voter in Collin County who maybe is that white suburban soccer mom and she's going to win the election for us. Well, we can't do that. And we've got to literally go everywhere and be for everyone. And so whether that means going up to, Bonham, Texas, which I've been to listen to voters in that Republican county, or returning again and again to DeSoto and meeting with Mayor Proctor and the city council and, Pastor King at his church and getting to meet people who I want to make sure they know I do not only not take them for granted, I have so much to learn from and follow in terms of their lead. And so that's the way I'm running this. It means I'm on the ground all the time. I mean, nonstop. And we're running the toughest, hardest race I think a candidate or a campaign could possibly mount. But I do think that's the only way to be able to win and to persuade and also to turn out and to excite and also to make sure that people understand that we're in this together. And I don't know the way to do that at a distance, to phone it in or to just beam it on the airwaves. We've got to show up and demonstrate that we really mean it in person.
Hey, have you been surprised, either positively or negatively, at the reception as you travel around the state? What's been your sense?
Yeah, sometimes, I mentioned going up to Bonham or nearby in Grayson County, and you think, well, this is a relatively rural community. It's always been represented by Republicans, at least in my adult lifetime. Who's going to want to come out and see us? And to have these overcapacity audiences, and even the Republicans who will sometimes come out to protest my visit, very often because Greg Abbott and really no statewide Republican officials ever shown up in these communities to listen to them or meet with them. They're excited that we've come as well. And I don't know that I'll earn that person's vote, the county Republican chairwoman, but she'll come out to see what I'm about, to shake hands, to say hello, and to remind us that we have a lot of common ground in front of us on which we can work. And that's been a very pleasant surprise as I've crossed this state, and the level of energy and enthusiasm and turnout at these events. I mentioned to you briefly before we got started, we were just at University of Texas Arlington a couple of days ago at University of Texas Dallas. Thousands of students are coming out, and not only are they coming out, but they're registering to vote. They're signing up to get their classmates and friends and neighbors signed up as well. It's pretty encouraging and surprising in a really positive way.
That's good. So one of my wish list items is there's 1 million black folk from Texarkana down to Beaumont, stuck in the piney woods, right? About 5 years ago, Donna Brazil told us that there's, at that time, 750,000 unregistered black voters. And by the way, October 11th is the last day for voter registration, so
that's right.
You got to get it in before this time tomorrow. Have you seen, just for our audience, I'll say in Louis Gohmert territory,
yeah,
have you seen the kind of black turnout that would make you hopeful for increased turnout?
Absolutely. I was just at Wiley College not even a week ago in Marshall, Texas, and meeting with the student body there, the president of the Student Government Association, Ms. Wiley College, and hundreds of other students who came out to listen, but also to share. We held it as a town hall, so there were 2 microphones in the room, and people could ask, and they did, really good, urgent questions about what we're going to do after we win. We were at Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches a little bit after that. We've been to Palestine and to Pittsburgh, to Carthage, to Longview, to Texarkana. You mentioned Beaumont there and Port Arthur as well, really showing up everywhere. And yes, the turnout and the response in communities that, again, functionally, I think have been taken for granted by everybody, by statewide candidates from both parties, certainly by the current governor and government, and looking for a reason to vote and someone to vote for, but they're not just going to do it because I have a D next to my name. I got to show up, and we have to have this conversation, and that vote must be earned. And I know what that's like. I live in El Paso, literally the very opposite end of the state in the Mountain Time Zone. No one ever came out to El Paso. No one ever fought for us or tried to earn our vote. And when someone did, it would absolutely shake the earth. And so I want to make sure that I am literally going to every single community. And yes, Charles, to your question, when we do that, people turn out and they show up in great numbers. And that's been really exciting for us.
So we're going to, in a minute, after this question, we'll turn to some of the issues that inflame campaigns. But Governor Abbott appointed a Secretary of State who probably is not friendly to, or would certainly be one that would be a hard nose on those recently passed voter suppression bills. Do you expect that will be a dampening effect on turnout or even on the tabulations for that matter?
I think that's certainly the intention. You look at the fact that more than 750 polling places have been closed, most of them under Greg Abbott. It's twice the number of the next closest state. And most of those polling place closures have occurred in the fastest growing black and brown neighborhoods. I tell people, when you see that line 6 hours deep outside of Texas Southern University in Houston, it's not just that people are so excited to vote, it is that may be the only option. And for every person willing to wait and able to wait 6 hours, how many are working too hard or too many jobs or raising their kids or just dealing with life and literally don't have what they may consider a luxury to stand and wait to vote. And so that's very intentional, and it's targeted at a very specific population, as it really always has been over the history of Texas, and that is black voters in this state. Today's voter suppression, in addition, targets the very young, the very old, other communities of color, and increasingly those with disabilities in the state. That's their plan, and our plan has to be one in which we overcome that. And so I'm so happy that we have 95,000 and growing volunteers on our campaign who are knocking on the doors of those who are the very targets of suppression and intimidation in an effort to give them a reason to come out and to participate in this election and make sure that those drawn out are actually brought in to comprise the margin of victory when we win this on November 8th. But it won't be through me, the candidate, or through my political party. It's really got to be all of us doing all we can. And then once we win, we absolutely must restore fully the right to vote in Texas. And from online and automatic and same-day voter registration to ending the gerrymandering that we have to addressing legitimate problems with today's current voter ID laws. And one idea that I like a lot is replacing Confederate Heroes Day as a celebrated state holiday with Election Day as a celebrated state holiday. So literally someone could take the day off of work or will be given the day off of work to be able to cast their ballot. Then you start approaching a real, full functioning democracy in the state of Texas.
That's right. Well, okay, so Texas all of a sudden finds itself the state with the largest black population among the 50 states. And I think that demands that all of those other issues that we talked about that inflame campaigns, besides election reform, but education and healthcare access and voting and all the other stuff that states are responsible for, shouldn't necessarily reflect the very unique challenges that are faced by that large community. That is 4 million, if we factor for over undercounts, probably more. 4 million black people in the state of Texas that current administrations and those succeeding this current administration acted as if they didn't exist or governed as if they did not exist. Folk are hopeful, I think, in the black community that would change with your election. Education always is at the top of folks' concerns. My mother was a public school teacher, so I feel it as well. Now we're talking about changing the curriculum. So how would you address some of the, again, I'll call them bizarre things that came out of the most recent legislative session that hamstring teachers' ability to deliver a quality education, and they're saying that it's the right product that they're delivering.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, we think about everything that teachers are going through right now. They're so badly underpaid. The average is $7,500 down in Texas against the national average. On average, the Texas teacher is working a second or a third job to supplement his or her income. They have to contend with a high-stakes, high-pressure, standardized test that is really kind of the exception in the country and doesn't really effectively measure the potential of the child or the effort expended on that kid's behalf by the teacher. They now know that we lead the nation in the number of school shootings, more than any of the other 49 states. And now that teacher's being told by our governor that you dare not teach this state's full, true story and history. And instead of supplying the facts to those children in front of her, she has to wonder whether what she's saying is hewing to what is allowed by those in office today who have not spent a day in the classroom as an instructor or a teacher. And it's no wonder then that these educators are leaving the profession by the thousands. We are watching the greatest exodus of talent from Texas classrooms really probably in the history of the state. So we can look at every one of those in reverse. If we pay teachers more, if we treat them with respect, if we replace the STAR test with something that actually works, something more akin to a diagnostic. And if we say, if you want to teach the story that I just shared earlier of Dr. Lawrence Nixon and his successful fight over white supremacy and the white primary, Lonnie Smith, Thelma White, who integrated higher education in the state of Texas. So many extraordinary stories that we can be proud of, and also so many stories that may cause us some shame about our history, but we should know them lest we repeat these mistakes. And I raised Dr. Nixon's story earlier because this attack on voting rights is nothing new. We've been down this road before, and I want to make sure that my kids who are in the public schools in Texas and El Paso learn that history and can make the connections that what's happening now has happened before. We've overcome it before. We can overcome that again. If we don't know that history, there's that saying that we're doomed to repeat it, and or we'll fail to take the lessons from it that we could apply to our current challenges. And then lastly, it's just so disrespectful to those who've given literally the best years of their lives to educate our kids. They've taken tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt in order to do this. They don't do it for the money or the fame or the glory. They do it because they want to impart that wisdom and unlock that lifelong love of learning amongst those children. Let's allow them to do that. And so I think that's one of the things that we're going to be able to achieve. And one other thing, if I might, and that is that I think it's really important. I say this here in Dallas, I feel it in El Paso and everywhere around the state, that more and more our educators actually look like the students that they are teaching. When I look at the level of discipline in a kindergarten classroom, a black child 5 times more likely than a white child to be suspended or expelled or punished in some respect for the same infraction. I don't know that that's a conscious, deliberate decision by that teacher. It may be a bias that they unconsciously bring with them into the classroom, but I know the best answer is to intentionally cultivate and hire black educators, and especially where we can, black men, to be in front of these classrooms and to be working with children who I think they're going to be able to do so much to help, to support, and again, to unlock in terms of potential and promise.
Now that works. I mean, and that's perfect for in the classroom delivery of education. But we've got this entire machinery, Texas Education Agency, that's just teeming with folk who have allowed this bad educational product to be delivered. What do you do about that? What do you do about state agencies that don't respond to citizens?
We have a TEA commissioner today who I am sure is doing his level best and pursuing what he thinks will deliver the best outcome for Texas kids in public education, but to my knowledge does not have experience as a classroom educator or an educator in a public school. I think elevating somebody who's been in that position, and ideally elevating somebody, perhaps whose experience and expertise hasn't always been reflected by those in positions of power, is going to allow us to deliver far better for children who, for whatever reason, again, maybe not intentionally, haven't received the resources, the attention, the accountability, the expectations that we really want for them. So, not only is it who we elect into a position of public trust, it's who that leader elevates into positions of power to manage, as you pointed out, or called it, the machinery of public education in Texas. And I just want to make sure we have people in those positions who've got that experience, who reflect, the true strength and power and diversity of the state of Texas. And that's a real exciting prospect to me because, again, for whatever reason, that hasn't been the case historically. And we have a chance to change that after November 8th.
Boy, that's one that we've been hopeful for a long time. Criminal justice reform. What are the most glaring parts of that part of the Texas government that you think beg our attention?
Nationally, we have a real challenge with this, where we, of course, incarcerate more Americans than any other country does of their citizens. And whatever we think of China or Russia, we put more of our own behind bars than they do of theirs. But within this overly incarcerated country, Texas puts more behind bars than any other state. And when we look at who is serving time right now, for example, for nonviolent drug crimes like possession of marijuana, it is overwhelmingly black and brown Texans. The reason that is so glaring to me is that we know that Texans of all races and ethnicities use that substance at the same rate. Why is it that black Texans are 4 times as likely as white Texans to serve time for possession? So, we've talked in this campaign about making marijuana legal for all the right reasons, but to do that is insufficient to the task at hand if we don't also meet that with an expungement of the records for those who've served time. Because what I've learned from listening to those who have is that you are now forced to check a box on every employment application form, much more difficult to qualify for student loans or small business loans. Your advancement is really constrained and your options are narrowed. So that expungement is one step in the right direction. Also listening to law enforcement who will share with me that, Beto, in addition to deterring or investigating violent crime or property crimes, you have me, checking on those who are experiencing homelessness or going through mental health crises. Should that really be the job of law enforcement, or should we elevate and fund mental health care access, for example, in a state whose largest provider of mental health care services today is the county jail system? And what I've learned from law enforcement and mental health care advocates and community leaders alike is that if we funded these kinds of interventions, we could really decrease the level of unnecessary incarceration, really improve the productivity of our fellow Texans who just need to be healthy and well enough to go to work or to finish their education or raise their families. Whatever it is they should be able to do without insurance in the least insured state in America, they're having a very hard time getting this done. So expanding Medicaid, fully funding these programs, in addition to making sure that law enforcement is not only fully funded, but funded with the training to ensure that we're treating everybody, regardless of difference in skin color or anything else, equally under the law. And then anyone who fails to meet that bar needs to be held accountable, and there needs to be justice. And if we don't get there, I know we're going to continue to have issues with trust between communities and the law enforcement members who are sworn to serve and protect them. And I know all involved, the communities, members of law enforcement, leaders within Dallas and our other 253 counties, they want to see us get this done, and we totally can get it done. But we need to change who's in power right now to make that happen.
You had one highly reposted and went viral in a response to a Second Amendment proponent in one of your town hall meetings that you responded to him in the language that he understood. How have you won souls, so to speak, to your perspective on gun regulations in the state, or lack of the same? What have you found as you've walked around the state?
I haven't met the person who is okay with where we are today, where we lead the nation in the number of school shootings, where gun violence is now the leading cause of death for children and teenagers in the state of Texas, where we are, as of tomorrow, 20 weeks from those 19 children and their 2 teachers being killed in Uvalde. And the government and our governor has done nothing to make it any less likely that any other child will meet that fate in any other classroom in Texas. And also this, which doesn't get said enough, we know about Uvalde and El Paso and Midland and Sutherland Springs and Santa Fe High School, but what we don't really take the time to know is that every day in this state, people are dying 1, 2, 3 at a time. And it has become so common that we don't read about these people in the newspaper. We don't see their faces on the news. And it is as though there's a tacit acceptance of this being the price we pay for living and for them dying in the state of Texas. So what I have heard is I've listened to gun owners and non-gun owners and Democrats and Republicans and just Texans, is that there are some things we can agree on that would reduce gun violence and allow us to protect the Second Amendment at the same time. Raising the age of purchase for an AR-15 to 21. Having a red flag law so law enforcement could intervene using due process before someone with a firearm uses it against somebody if they've threatened to do that. A universal background check, and it is hard to argue the other side of this. It just means if you buy a gun in Texas, we just want to do some due diligence to make sure you're not going to use it against yourself or against someone in your life or someone in our lives. Those three things, there's a lot else we could argue about. Those three things we have near universal agreement on. And by the way, so would the Governor Abbott today, if he would call a special session, bring Democrats and Republicans around the table and say, listen, here are three things that would save lives in the state of Texas. But for whatever reason, he hasn't done that. And so we don't want to wonder at his motive. We just need to acknowledge that after 8 years, this is where we are. He's unwilling or unable to do what's necessary to make it better. We just have to turn the page and move forward. And on reducing gun violence, I know that we can make a lot of progress.
So just to book in on that, most organized law enforcement associations opposed open carry.
That's right.
And unlicensed carry. What's your relationship with those groups, and do you think that adds, if you've got a good relationship with them, is that going to be a benefit to your campaign?
Yes, I've listened to officers, deputies, chiefs, and sheriffs. They were almost uniformly opposed to the governor's proposal, which he ended up signing into law, to do away with the license to carry program that had been used 38,000 times over the last 6 years to deny one of our fellow Texans the ability to carry a gun in public, because through the license to carry program, you had to do that due diligence and that background check, and they'd find, you know what, this person has a history of abusing their spouse or self-harm or violence against others, and they should not have a loaded gun out on our streets 38,000 times. And so law enforcement begged the governor not to sign permitless carry into law, and he literally turned his back on them and did it anyhow to curry favor with the NRA. I can only wonder, but what it has led to is a 50% increase in homicides in the state of Texas. More cops have been gunned down in this state than in any other in the union. And we have a serious concern with violent crime. He may try to blame that on Joe Biden or Beto O'Rourke, who is not in office. I don't know how I could contribute to it. But really, after 8 years, after denying the request from law enforcement to do the right thing, he really owns where we are right now. But we all own the solution to that, which is winning in November and replacing, his irresponsible permitless carry with a return to that license to carry program and those other three proposals that we talked about. Doing that, we defend the Second Amendment, and we do a far better job of protecting the lives of those in our lives.
Okay. So in our conversation during the primary session, I did ask you about something that's important to me, is contracting opportunities for black-owned businesses in the state of Texas. Again, given this almost dramatic growth in black population in the state, and an equitable investment through our taxes, through taxes. So we're paid up. We got what we call in business paid in capital, right? We are paying for this government. But the last biennium, we had to round up to get 1% of state procurement opportunities. After 35 years of legislation expressly crafted to increase utilization. How would you address that?
I was on the El Paso City Council for 6 years, and a similar challenge, opportunity was brought to our attention there, that those who are winning contracts from the city of El Paso didn't always look like the community they served. And we're all for diversity in contracting, but it has to be fully reflective of the entire community. And the idea that the ordinance written, you may do X, Y, or Z, essentially effectively lets people off the hook.
That's
when you
right.
change that to you shall, and
right.
this is the law,
That's right.
then people really start to pay attention, and there are consequences, and there is accountability. For a biannual budget of $250 billion for the ninth largest economy on the planet, there are the resources to invest in Black-owned businesses. And as you and I discussed before, there's kind of a catch-22 at work. Very often, a prerequisite for winning a state contract will have to be, do you have history working for the state of Texas?
Right.
And there has to be an opportunity to break through for the first time. And the other challenge that we discussed and we need to address is bonding capacity. Very often there'll be a very high amount set that a contractor or sub will have to be able to bond at. And many of these smaller mom and pop owned businesses in Dallas or El Paso or throughout the state literally do not have the wherewithal. They need to be able to build up over time. So I would love to work with the business community here and across the state in finding those programs that allow smaller businesses to step up to become larger businesses, and to do that through opportunities in state contracting. I just saw something about the Texas Department of Transportation budget. I think there's $8 billion in their account right now that is left unspent. When I drive the roads in Dallas County, I know that there is more that we can be doing right now. I know there are many businesses, including Black-owned businesses, that have the capacity and the expertise and experience to do that work. Let's connect those dollars, $8 billion, with those businesses and get that done. And that, of course, applies throughout the state of Texas. And lastly, I love your point about the fact that this is not doing a special favor for anybody. These are businesses who followed the rules, run by people who have paid their taxes, done everything the right way, and for whatever reason have never been allowed to break into the opportunity to serve their state in this capacity. I want to make sure that we break that open for everyone who wants to be able to get that done.
We want that to happen. Okay?
Yes.
That's a wish list. So what have you found surprising as you travel around the state?
You know, I think there's a shorthand that we too often use, and I'll just use myself as an example that I too often use, that if a community is rural, it's going to have certain characteristics. It's going to be Republican, it's going to be white, people are going to have certain views on certain issues. What I've learned by going to rural communities is, in many instances, they are as diverse as any other part of Texas. You mentioned the Pine Curtain and the million potential Black voters who live behind that. Far too often, those communities have been written off as rural Republican white communities, and they're not. And in so many instances, there has been no effort to reach out to organize, to listen to learn from those whom we should be serving so much more effectively. And I may assume when I go to a rural community that folks won't want to talk about reproductive health care freedom, or they won't want to talk about gun violence in the terms that we've been talking about, or they won't want to talk about contracting opportunities for African American owned businesses. That's just something that pertains to Dallas or DeSoto or Houston or the Fifth Ward. And nothing could be further from the truth. These are universal issues. And I've found if I fail to raise those, people will raise them for me. And that's been a learning experience, and a really positive one for me. And it confirms that there's far more that unites us right now in this moment in this state than would otherwise divide us, whether that division would be geographic or partisan or race or religious or otherwise. People want to come together and do big things together right now. So I've loved that surprise. And same holds true. We just held a town hall in DeSoto not too long ago with Marcus King at his church. And whatever the turnout was in DeSoto 4 years ago, it was orders of magnitude larger this time. And I think that's people hungry to have a role in their government and hungry to have a say in who will be their governor, and not a knee-jerk, reflexive, partisan reaction to who's on the ballot. But I want to come and listen to this guy and also share with him a piece of my mind and see if there's some common ground there as well. And so the way that people have chosen to meet this moment, they could have chosen to stay at home, to despair, to say, with all these attacks on so many, maybe I just need to leave the state altogether. They're choosing to come out and come together and be part of something so extraordinary that I truly believe is going to overcome these challenges and attacks that we see right now. I mean, not only will we win on November 8th, I think after winning, we'll be able to govern in a way that meets so many of these needs that you and I have raised over the course of this conversation. And that's exciting to me. It's cause for optimism and hope. And I think we all need that after a really, really tough year, or really couple of years in Texas. And I'm as hopeful as I've ever been.
So we'll wrap before we let you make a closing statement to our viewing audience. Maternal mortality and just inaccessible health care in far too many communities, particularly those that Black folk live in. How would you address that? I mean, just how can Texas be number one in stuff that's so bad?
Yes. We're number one in childhood diabetes deaths. We talked about number one in school shootings, gun violence, a leading cause of death for children and teenagers. And when I say those things, it sounds like they apply to everyone equally, and we know that they don't. Gun violence disproportionately borne by communities of color, and specifically African American communities and neighborhoods across the state of Texas. And that also holds true for this epidemic of maternal mortality, which is 3 times as deadly for Black women in the state of Texas. Certainly restoring reproductive health care, freedom, full bodily autonomy, and everything that comes with that. Reopening reproductive health care clinics that may not only provide access to a safe legal abortion, but would provide access to a cervical cancer screening or family planning help or postpartum care, or even just a doctor in many of these really underserved, underinsured communities. I think that's one step. We had a great conversation in Tarrant County earlier today. This question came up, and we talked about how, in addition to being very intentional about the educators that we hire and having more Black men at the head of classrooms and in front of children who disproportionately have borne the brunt of discipline and a schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline that can begin as early as 5 years old. I think when we look at our healthcare providers, we need to make sure that they also look like the communities that they're serving. And it's not just going to happen of its own accord. I think the state funding, the policies, the intention all have to be there. And I know from that we get better outcomes, because one might think that this crisis in maternal mortality is only borne by women of lower income. But we know that women of higher income with graduate degrees and extraordinarily successful in their lives are also succumbing to this in the state of Texas. And what I hear from so many of them that I've listened to is it has something to do with how care is delivered and by whom. And that is something well within our power to address and to fix. And very often it is connecting that aspiring physician or provider with the resources that allow her to complete that education, get that MD, and then be able to return to that community that raised her to be able to deliver for and save the lives of those who are counting on her. So another great opportunity that we have in front of us, and we don't have to accept this epidemic as our permanent future or fate. We have agency in this, and that agency begins by voting and winning this election on November 8th, but continues through making these changes that you and I just discussed.
And so to bookend that, Medicaid expansion necessarily is another critical piece of healthcare delivery. For some reason, again, our state government has been resistant to. So how will you engineer changing the mindset to make people understand how critical the expansion of Medicaid is?
You're absolutely right. I don't know there's anything that we could do that would be more effective to improving outcomes and even saving lives in Texas than expanding Medicaid. It would bring $10 billion back to Texas every single year of the federal income taxes that we've paid up. Right now, because we haven't accepted Medicaid expansion, our federal income taxes are flowing to Oklahoma, to Arkansas, to Louisiana, New Mexico. All of our border states, every single one of them has taken Medicaid expansion. They're getting our lunch right now. So in addition to the $10 billion a year, we can stand up some of these closed clinics and hospitals, especially in rural Texas, hire more providers. We could fund the program that I just described, where we are intentionally ensuring that providers look like and have the experiences of those communities that are counting on them to be of service. We can reduce property taxes because the local homeowner and renter is no longer on the hook for uncompensated indigent care, and we'll be saving lives. We'll no longer be dead last in the nation when it comes to access to care, whether it's mental health care, pharmaceutical care, or direct, medical doctor intervention. And we will be so much healthier and so much better to work, to raise families, to run for office, to publish a newspaper, whatever we were placed on this planet to perform. All we are asking is that we be well enough to get that done. And you ask politically what makes that possible. It really enjoys very broad, very strong bipartisan support. The business community, the nonprofit community, everyone is behind this, and literally the one person standing in the way today is the current governor, Greg Abbott, and I don't understand the rationale or the decision so far. 3 of those border states that we have that have accepted Medicaid expansion had Republican governors when they got it done, so it doesn't have to be a function of partisanship, but we're going to need to change who's in that office if we're going to expect to change how we look at Medicaid expansion in Texas.
Okay. Now, there's been one issue that has animated Governor Abbott more than any other that I've heard him speak to, and that's the border crisis. Talk about what's really happening.
We really do have legitimate challenges at the border. The level of fentanyl coming into this country, the number of humans who are smuggled, illegally, and sometimes in ways that endanger or cause them to lose their lives. We must be more vigilant against that, more successful in countering that. But what we also have is just a terribly broken immigration system that was last reformed when Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States. And against that very serious, legitimate challenge, we have a governor who after 8 years is more interested in stunts like busing migrants to New York or Chicago or Washington, D.C. for that matter, than he is in the solutions that could address this. And those solutions could include a Texas-based guest worker program, for example. If you want to come here to work a job that for whatever reason we cannot fill from someone in the community, then I want there to be a safe, legal, orderly path for you to apply and for that employer to meet you halfway and to get that done. Today, it's just out of reach for too many who want to do this the right way, and though it doesn't condone it, it provides an incentive for them to do it the wrong way. Same for those who just want to be with family members and are in a 20-year wait to do this the right way, and those who seek asylum and find themselves in a 6-year adjudication wait time today. If there were that safe, legal, orderly, and far quicker path to petition to come to this country, you wouldn't have so many tens of thousands crossing in between ports of entry. We could be more successful against those who pose harm to our country. And this is really important to me. You would no longer leave an opening to demagogues like our current governor who demonize and vilify immigrants, or our lieutenant governor who described those 14,000 Haitian refugees huddled under the bridge in Del Rio as this threat to our country, and said something to the effect, if we let them in, they'll have kids, those kids will grow up, they'll vote, and they'll replace us, adding fuel to the fire of replacement theory that has driven so many of the horrific acts of violence in Buffalo and El Paso, Texas, my hometown, in 2019. We must solve this, and the solution should come from Texas because we live and understand this issue more than any other people in any other state. And so as governor, I want to bring these best minds, Democrats, Republicans alike, together to get this done.
Very good. So here's your chance to look into the camera and just talk to Texas voters, particularly those who, again, are readers and viewers of the Dallas Examiner, and make your appeal to them, and we'll wrap our segment.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, Charles, and to the readers and viewers of the Dallas Examiner, to Molly Belt and this extraordinary team that is putting this on right now, and not just for this opportunity today, but over the last 5 years, every time that I've come to this office or to the forums where I last saw you hosted at the museum, I've had an opportunity to be held accountable by those voters that I want to serve. And I'm serious about wanting to serve you. And that's why we show up everywhere, writing nobody off and taking nobody for granted. Not only do we want to stop the bad, extreme things that are happening today, total ban on abortion with no exception for rape or incest, gun violence, the leading cause of death for children and teenagers, a grid that is still not fixed and won't work in this next winter if the temperature drops too far. But I want to make sure that we fix those problems and move on to do great things, supporting public education and public educators, making sure that we have great jobs that pay a true living wage in this state, that we expand Medicaid, as Charles and I were just talking about, and that everyone is treated equally under the law so that there's opportunity for every community and every family across the state of Texas. Thank you so much for the opportunity you've given me to run, to serve you. I'm asking for your vote when early voting starts on the 24th of October and Election Day, November 8th. Thank you very much. And Charles, thank you for this opportunity.
Beto O'Rourke,
Appreciate
Democratic candidate for office of governor for the state of Texas. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Grateful to you.
We'll be right back with you with the next segment of Monday Night Politics. Thank you so much.